You are now listening to the House by the Video Store podcast.
There's no more room in hell. The dead will walk near.
We have such sights to show you.
I kick ass for the Lord!
Praise God!
Welcome to the House by Video Store podcast. I'm your host, William, and joining me today will be Derek.
Hello.
And we'll be discussing The Haunting of Hill House, and that's the only topic we'll discuss because happy Halloween. Because so this episode is Haunting of Hill House, and the next episode will be Pet Sematary, the original adaptation of the Stephen King novel, the one that there's been the trailers recently released that show what the remake's going to look like. That's going to be coming out soon.
With John Lithgow in it.
It's going to have John Lithgow, and it's one of those things where it's getting a lot of buzz, and we figured, take a look at the original one because we hadn't. So the original 1989 movie that, it's something surprisingly didn't have great critics reviews when it came out, because it's one of those movies that now is kind of, I don't know, all these movies, whenever a remake gets announced, there's kind of like this weird dissection of the fan base where it's the people that hate it, people that love it, people that used to like it, but now they hate it and they think the new one's going to be better. And there's people who think the original is a classic that can't be touched and should never be redone. So these weird kind of different sections of the fan base. But we'll be doing that on the next episode. But on this episode, to get it out in time for Halloween, we're going to be talking about Haunting of Hill House because it's a new series on Netflix that was directed by Mike Flanagan, and he directed the entire series. So that's something I really like seeing on series like on HBO or Netflix or different, networks like Showtime with Twin Peaks. When they let one director do an entire series, I think it gives it a much more cohesive feel.
Yeah, it gives it a much cohesive feel, and it just feels, it's all their ideas, so there's nothing that really feels at a place. Like, all this, now the way that they shot this is kind of like, it's kind of also a mystery on top of everything, so it's kind of jumbled up, but it's meant to do that. And then, obviously as it plays, everything makes more sense. But I was not that hot on Mike Flanagan, but then after watching this series, I've really changed my views on it.
So if you look at what Mike Flanagan's career is, and two, for the episode, we'll be discussing the show without spoilers and just general thoughts and things we think about the overall series as a whole and give some opinions, and then move into spoiler discussion of, the actual story beats and things like that. So if you want to hear what our opinions are, if you haven't watched it yet, and then if you have watched it, you can come in and see what we thought about the different story elements. But, before we get directly into the show, so Mike Flanagan had directed a number of things. So he's done a number of things for Netflix in recent years. He did that Hush that was picked up by them.
So that was something I was not very hot on.
So that was the kind of modern home invasion slasher movie where the lead actress or the character was deaf. So that adds a new layer to the home invasion story if your lead character is deaf and can't, hear someone around her. And that movie starred, the lead actress was Katie Siegel, who is in Haunting of Hill House as Theo. So there's a lot of people that have been in his other projects that show up in this new one.
Or just people who've been in similar projects together, because the young actress who plays Shirley
was in Ouija Origin of Evil that he directed.
The adult version of her was also in that movie as well.
Yes, as the mother of the girl. So in one movie, the adult and child version of Shirley from Haunting of Hill House played mother and daughter in a different movie.
And then they play each other.
Let's see. Then there's other actresses. So the actress who is in Hush as the redheaded friend is in Haunting of Hill House as Lee Crane, which is Steven's wife.
Yeah.
So then there's a bunch of other connections because the dad, so the young version of the dad,
E.T.
the young version, Henry Thomas was in Ouija Origin of Evil as the priest.
Yeah.
And so then it's just funny how a lot of the actors that have been in Mike Flanagan's movies appear in other movies, which is, something we do with short films. You get a kind of base group of people that you're comfortable working with and you kind of understand each other's shorthand, and then you just like working with them because it moves more quickly than if it's somebody you have to completely come in and acclimate to each other.
I will say the cast for this was excellent. There wasn't anybody I think was miscast. I don't think there, a lot of times too, this is a show that focuses a lot on children. And one of our gripes sometimes can be that children actors don't necessarily always work. But in this one, like all of them are great. You know, because that sometimes you have movies that just focus too much on the kids, and it's not necessarily the kids' fault. It's just maybe that they're not directed well enough, or I don't really know. It just doesn't work. Whereas this, like every single kid in it, and the adult versions too, were great. You know.
Yeah.
And you don't get that a lot.
Well, I think, too, though, you have, like, Mike Flanagan, like, Ouija Origin of Evil had a child actor that was one of the lead characters.
Yeah.
And then he'd also done, so for Netflix, they released Hush, and then he had also done Gerald's Game for them, the Stephen King adaptation.
He's doing another... He's doing the sequel to The Shining.
Yeah, Dr. Sleep. I think it's supposed to have Ewan McGregor as Danny Torrance. So so after seeing some of his work leading up to this show... Like, I didn't think Hush was a terrible movie by any means. No, it just wasn't a movie I came away of as one of my favorites or anything.
To me, it was kind of mediocre.
It was, something where I think it was shot for a tiny budget, which makes sense. Interesting concept. Just one of those movies I should probably rewatch at some point just to see if I get another opinion. Ouija Origin of Evil, I thought was probably one of the best versions of that type of movie you can make.
Yeah, it wasn't bad.
And then it was better
than the original.
And then Gerald's Game I thought was good. And then they had Carla Gugino, who's been in Haunting of Hill House. So, a lot of stuff that's out there of his you can watch on Netflix specifically. And Before I Wake was the movie that I haven't seen yet, but I remember seeing trailers for it. They had like Thomas Jane and stuff, and then it just never came out. Jane. And then it got hung up, and then finally Netflix picked it up and released it. So I think that one was less of like a straight horror movie and more of kind of a high concept, like the kids' dreams or nightmares come to life.
So that never actually hit theatrical release?
No, because there were trailers for it.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember seeing the trailers for that in movie theaters.
And then it just took until, I think it screened at some festivals and stuff, but it took until Netflix picked it up. So there's a bunch of stuff out there with Mike Flanagan. You can check out some of his work. A lot of it's on Netflix, which this show is also on Netflix, but... Now we can get into discussing the show itself, Haunting of Hill House. Like I said, we'll hold the spoilers until later on.
Yeah, because if you haven't watched the show, maybe just listen to this part, and then, if it sounds something that interests you, then check it out. Do not listen to the spoilers, though, because that takes out pretty much all the fun of the series.
Yeah, and it's, like all these ghost stories. So this is based on a book.
Yes. What's the author's name? The author's name? Shirley Jackson?
Let's see.
Shirley something.
Yeah, Shirley Jackson. The Haunting of Hill House is a 1959 novel by Shirley Jackson, and it was made into a movie. There's been 2 movies prior to this television adaptation, and
one of them had Owen Wilson. His head got knocked off in it.
Yeah, so there was a 1963 version, which actually got some critical acclaim and positive discussion. The 1999 version, which had Liam Neeson, Catherine Zeta-Jones, Owen Wilson. Who else was in it?
The lady from The Conjuring, the first Conjuring. That was like
Lily Taylor. So I had Lily Taylor, Owen Wilson, Catherine Zeta-Jones, Liam Neeson.
Spoiler alert: Owen Wilson loses his head into the fire.
A pretty big cast. I mean, especially now in hindsight.
Now, one thing I always was trying to find out, because you also have the Vincent Price classic. The House on Haunted Hill, which they're not related.
Yeah,
but because they both came out in '59, so I was like,
or the novel came out in '59, the movie came out in '63.
The Vincent Price movie,
the original,
the Vincent Price movie that I'm talking about came out in '59.
Yeah, so it came out in 1959.
I was just wondering,
directed by William Castle.
Trying to see if there's any connection there, because it's really weird that you have both movies, or a book and a movie, both talking about houses on haunted hills.
Yeah, I think,
and for them to be unrelated, I was just wondering if there's any type of anything there that maybe one influenced the other, and I couldn't find anything about it.
The book came out in '59. Obviously, the movie coming out in the same year wouldn't really have time.
But that was back in the... I mean, I just to me, it's weird that you had two things come out around the similar time, similar names, similar concept,
So the funny thing, too, is the original, the House on Haunted Hill movie with Vincent Price was one that had the gimmick, like where skeletons were in the theater and would drop down and stuff. So that's the type of thing that I don't think we'll ever get again, because now they have like the 4D, like the seats move and there's wind and you can smell stuff and it sprays you with things. But I don't think we'll have like them just like have a little chintzy skeleton on a fishing line.
Yeah, but it'd be kind of cool. But again, like I think nowadays too, people are such assholes that somebody to rip it down or do something stupid to it, because like, if somebody got scared, they'd have to like punch it or do something that was like, come on, have fun with the game. I could see them doing it in special screenings.
Yeah, like a special like festival thing. Or...
Yeah, we have what's the Bardstown Road Theater, Baxter Avenue.
Yeah, they have like midnight screenings.
I could see maybe doing something in a smaller venue like that. because that's the audience.
Because I saw The Thing there a couple years ago with Sean and his wife and some friends, and it was a midnight screening, and it was in February, I believe. And at the screening, they turned the air conditioning up. So or they turned the temperature of the room was like 50 when we're all watching The Thing. So that was like a really cool idea. And I'm usually hot natured anyway, so I was fine being able to leave my jacket on.
But I mean, I think like in a midnight screening, or like people that go and see what's the movie with Tim Curry,
Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Rocky Horror, like that group of people, that would work because they'd appreciate it, and that's just kind of. But I think your general movie audience, you couldn't do anything like that now because somebody would just tear it up or. Which that always just reminds me of Scream 2, the beginning to that. Because I think even in that, they did something like that, but I can't remember.
Yeah, so in the house, or the I can't talk, I keep confusing the names. The Haunting of Hill House. So your basic premise is that the Crane family, so you have Hugh and Olivia are the parents, and then out of their children, they have Stevie, Shirley, Theo, and then Luke and Nellie.
Yeah.
And so they have this huge family. 7 people in the family.
7 versus 7.
Which is, they live in this house, and it's called The Haunting of Hill House. So you assume there's a haunting.
Well, the one thing I like about this, and I've heard people compare it to Hereditary. Now, I guess with those, I've not watched Hereditary.
Yeah.
Maybe I have. I can't remember.
No, you would know if you'd seen Hereditary.
Yeah. Anyway, I haven't watched it. Anyway, because, one of my issues with it, though, is like, it's, again, one of those, like, rich people who don't really actually have jobs that have these really big houses that's not explained. Or this one, it's like...
Well, in this one, the explanation is they buy and flip homes, and the husband is the one who does a lot of the work and manages that, and the wife is the one who does architectural design.
So it's like, okay, these people actually have skills that would lend them to be able to purchase this house and do the things to it.
At least they weren't writers.
No, I'm just saying, like, to me, and like maybe I'm also just a skilled laborer, so it's always kind of nice to see, like, because like again when you see like I'm an artist, it's like, well, how do you have this huge house if you're a struggling art? Anyway, it's kind of cool to see where this is not the case. They're actually
I think just a lot of movies have a tendency where the people writing the movies kind of project themselves into the character role. So you end up with movies where it's a struggling artist who lives in a mansion or in an expensive condo in New York, LA.
Defies logic,
Yeah, it's because you see like those house hunter shows or whatever, and it's like, oh, I am a volunteer kindergarten teacher for puppies, and I'm a graphic design artist who draws pictures of cats for something
$1 million budget.
Yeah, and then they have like the basic idea for the show is that you have this family that moves into the house because the mom and dad buy it to flip it, to renovate it, and then sell it.
This takes place over if you listen to him talk, I think they plan to flip the house in 8 weeks. So you're looking at maybe a span,
like 8 months, or
it was 8 weeks. I think. It was supposed to be a summer. So I think this takes place. It doesn't really give you an idea of actually how long, but within about 8 weeks of them moving into the conclusion of the childhood story, I think it's about 8 weeks.
Yeah, because it's not a huge amount of time, because it's basically just the family moves in. So it's the summer of '92 when they...
Which I actually thought that it was like in the 80s. So
yeah, so it takes place in the summer of '92, and then 26 years later in 2018, the present day. So you have a lot of stuff likes to set everything in the 80s, and being set just in the 90s gives it a tiny different bit of flavor versus the 80s, because they're not riding the bicycles around with flashlights and walkie-talkies and having Atari and arcade games, because like in this, one of the kids, Stevie's playing like a video game system that's from the 90s.
Yeah, I just kind of remind me of Star Fox almost from the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, I forget what game it was, but or it may have been like a custom made one. But but it's just one of those things where the family moves into the house in '92 and things go down, and then you catch up with the characters in present day in 2018, and the family has to come back together to deal with this house and fallout things, and where people maybe compare this to Hereditary, and there's things to disagree about that.
I've just seen comparison a lot.
I think the comparison is that a lot of the core of the story of The Haunting of Hill House, of course there are, I'm sure if you've seen anybody on social media talking about it, you've heard about ghosts, you've heard about jump scares, you've heard about things that people found to be frightening. So there are those traditional horror elements. but a lot of the core of the story is about the relationship between the family members, and about how they drift apart and come back together and things like that. So
this is like the horror version of Arrested Development.
But one brother has to keep them all together, except in this one it kind of shifts kind of perspective. And but yeah, I mean, so like something like Hereditary is really about the family relationships between the family members and how that affects the events that are going on around them, and that may be supernatural. And this is one where the family relationship drives a lot of the story. And I think if you want just gothic horror with scares and creepy imagery, you get that. Yeah. And if you want to have a little bit of an emotional center and core to it, where it's not just scares, there's story progression, development, and character development, and things like that, you get that as well. And then I think just whether somebody, goes from hating it to liking it to loving it, I think that a lot of where you fall in that spectrum depends on how you want your horror stories to work.
Now, this is not spoilers. I just want to throw this out there. This is a ghost story that actually contains ghosts in it from the first episode to the last episode. So a lot of times in these ghosts, in more of like your gothic style horror, you don't really get that sometimes. Or even because if you were my age or Williams, like you remember 10 years ago, you had like the Hunting in Connecticut and you had kind of Amityville reboots. And if I don't remember if you remember that, there was like about a 3-4 year period where they made a bunch of movies similar to that.
Yeah.
And those were ghost stories, but very seldom you ever actually see a ghost. And the Conjuring films are very similar. Whereas this one is, I think, much more effective because you do actually get to see ghosts.
Well, yeah.
And that keeps this interesting.
Yeah, because I think that when you compare this to something like, say, The Conjuring. So the Conjuring movies, people did find those to be very scary. And I remember seeing the first Conjuring at like one of those preview screenings a week or two before it came out.
I'm not saying Conjuring's not good, but this is just, I think, better.
I'm just saying comparing those two.
Yeah.
Like the Conjuring movie, when I saw that at one of those premiere screenings, it was like a packed audience. It was every single seat was taken. People were reacting very largely to the different scares in that movie, because I think James Wan is really great at set pieces and effective scares. And, The Conjuring 2 had some very effective sequences and things. But I think that those movies will have the scares in them, but they're more I'm trying to think. Is it like those Conjurings did have that really effective the nun sequence?
Yeah, but see, that was the bad thing about The Conjuring 2 is the best part of it was the nun.
Well, the nun, and then I forget what the crooked man or whatever.
That was okay. Yeah.
So there's elements of those movies, just not to go down that rabbit hole too far. It's just those movies had effective scares, and it was.
But I think it's relevant because they are ghost.
But I think that a difference between
they're haunting
between the genre, between those different types of movies and this series, The Haunting of Hill House does not follow the standard template of family experiences, supernatural elements, brings in an investigator or a spiritualist or a priest or an exorcist or any of these types of things that you see oftentimes where the people are in this house, someone comes and talks to them and tells them what to do, what not to do, and then the person helps. So Paranormal Activity had the investigators I'm out, bye. Yeah. It didn't even do that. It just kind of had the family dealing with these different elements. And two, you have the element of, in real life, if these things are going on with a family member, a loved one, or a friend, you would probably tell them to go seek mental help versus spiritual help because...
And what I kind of like about this is Hugh Crane, which is the patriarch, is kind of the everyman, kind of like most dads, I feel like, where, doesn't really necessarily believe in the ghosts. And then Steven is similar too. And then everybody, you kind of get to see how everybody else works around that. Which I think is just kind of very stereotypical in a lot of these stories.
Well, too, you have different members of the family that may be more or less sensitive to the supernatural element.
Which I think is a real thing. I think there are some people who are more sensitive to that kind of stuff.
But I think that the movie sets up all these relationships and sets up all these things because think of, if not even spoiling anything for the show, just in general, if you're a parent and your child came to you, if you have a sibling or a friend or somebody came to you and said, hey, so... last night when I was in bed, I woke up and I saw this really ghoulish, scary ghost standing at the edge of my bed looking at me. And
sleep paralysis.
And then it sat there, and you would say sleep paralysis because I am somebody that experiences sleep paralysis, and that's what it is. And before I experienced it as a kid a few times, and then as an adult when I was in college, I experienced it. And at first I was well, that was kind of terrifying because I remember seeing a Grim Reaper type figure. And I was like, did somebody break into our house? Like, what happened? And then I went and read up on the internet, and it's like, oh, this explains exactly what happened. And then after that, I just figured out ways to wake myself up from it when it goes on. So it's not as scary anymore as it is just an inconvenience.
Yeah.
But
I think everybody has stuff like that. Or like, I know this is when I still lived at home. This was a couple years ago before I bought my house. We had a cat named Jim, and he could open doors up. And I was in my room, and the door, if you have a cat, you know how all cats open doors the same way. They kind of like
paw under it.
Yeah, paw under it, or they just push up enough for the cat to come through. So my door opened up just enough for the cat to come through. And if you have a cat, cats tend to like slap you and stuff. So like Jim walked over, and slapped me in the face. So I'm like, Jim, you looking for the cat, and the cat wasn't in there.
Yeah.
And my mom was like, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, the cat just came in the room and slapped me in the face, and the cat was in their bedroom. So that was always kind of weird.
Ghost cat.
But yeah, it's just funny how that stuff like happens. Maybe you're dreaming or not. But if you have a cat, you know how they open the door because they just kind of, and the door barely opens up. Because I got a cat named Wednesday, and she can jiggle doorknobs and open them up.
Yeah,
and then you'll be in the bathroom or in the bed, or like I'll go in the basement and do laundry, and you hear her fumble with the door and her come down the stairs. But they kind of all open the doors.
Well, because one of Julie's cats opens up her hallway closet, and before she saw her do it, she's like, why is my closet open?
Yeah.
But then she saw her one day, stick the little cat paw under the door and go like pop 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 pop, and then open it. But so like in types of shows like Haunting of Hill House or movies or whatever, it's very plausible to me because whenever you're watching a movie, you're watching the movie and based on the title of it and the trailer and the description and the fact that it exists as a movie that something is happening.
Yeah.
So you have kind of this benefit of, dramatic tension of, that something's happening because you're seeing it, but the other characters in the story don't. So it can be frustrating at times when people don't believe supernatural stories in a supernatural movie. But think about in the context of the real world, if somebody just came to you and said, I saw a ghost, you'd be like, yeah right.
Well, see, that's kind of where Hugh fits in.
Because
he's that person.
But he's not just the harsh, terrible person that...
I think they made a great decision by having, was it Henry Thomas?
Yeah.
Young Hugh? I like the
and
older
Timothy
one.
Hutton is
I like both of them, but...
26 years later version.
I think he did a great job of... It's just one of those... perfect things. I don't want to say perfect, but it's like everybody's casted so
the funny thing is, so the difference in age between young and old
10.
Hugh is like 11 years or 10 years. So I mean, I guess though a lot of times actors can play up or down about 10 years. So I guess if you play up and then down, that makes sense. But
because Henry Thomas is in his mid 40s, but he could almost be the way he looks in that, and I could pass for like I could believe 39.
When both like in like Carla Gugino, she's not like 20 something. She's an adult. But I mean, I think it's one of those things where they play up and down. The ages didn't really bother me. I vastly prefer that to terrible age makeup.
Yeah, well,
because they only did one little bit of age makeup in a minor area, and that was fine to me. But yeah, so the casting, like you said, on the kids to the adults was pretty great, pretty spot on because some of them. So like Shirley, like they do look related.
They look, yes. That was one of the best castings I've seen as far as like
a child and adult version.
Yeah, I could believe that. I don't necessarily think to be mother daughter, but yeah, I would believe that they were in the same family tree.
Yeah,
because they are very similar. Everybody else, it's kind of. I mean, they all are similar. They all are believable. They like okay, I could see this person growing up into them. Where like. There's sometimes where you watch stuff and it's like, yeah, those two, like the TV version had Seth Green in a role, and then the adult that he grew up into, it's like, there's no way Seth Green grew up into that person.
Yeah, I mean, so there's, or you could argue like the Rob Zombie Halloween from young Michael Myers to adult Michael Myers. But but a lot of the stories kind of fall short on that, and draws attention to itself, or is
disruptive,
problematic.
It can take you out of it.
In this movie, some of them look dead on, and all of them were a good likeness to point. You didn't really question it, so all that was spot on. And the house itself, the set design for the house was really cool,
incredible. Yeah.
And I know that if I don't want to spoil like big set pieces, but there's like behind the scenes features. So there's some specific episodes that have all these different types of way things go on and how it's shot.
I would love to get a Blu-ray of this at some point. They release it for the behind the scenes.
Well, there's some behind the scenes of that I think I shared in our Facebook group. But
I'm not going to get into specifics, but there's one. It's episode 6 where there is a whole lot of long continuing shots. And just because I read it was a Variety article or something where they talked to Mike Flanagan about it. They're not going to get specifics until we get into spoilers. But just hearing the way that he talked about it, like, was really fascinating. Because I think they said that, like, they had shot that exact episode, not shot, but did the episode for 5 weeks straight with the second crew.
Yeah.
And then they, got down pat, and then they got the actual A crew involved, and they had to shoot it in 2 weeks, I think, or gave them 2 weeks of prep for it.
Yeah.
But just funny, they're talking about doing that stuff, people running in out of frame, and they're swapping around. It just sounded kind of hectic.
Yeah,
but it was really well done.
Somebody I was friends with on Facebook that I met at one of the film festivals he went to had worked on that show and had posted some behind the scenes like pictures and stuff. So it sounded like they were like people were ducking in and out, and like people were running all these jobs. So it's one of those things where the show itself like has some set piece moments in terms of technical craft that in the episode, works very well. When you watch the episode, like we rewatch part of it, and I want to rewatch the series again because I think that this is a series that does benefit. So when you may have heard people talk about hidden ghosts. So if you pay close attention to this show, you will see things in the background, and I think that adds a lot of layers to the viewing experience because a lot of times in horror properties. So I was trying to think of things to compare this to.
One thing I compare it to, and maybe you're thinking about this, just if you are a Resident Evil fan and you played Resident Evil 2, there is, when you beat the game, you get the Tyrant in there. And you go through the game, and
you can see him in the background.
In certain moments, you'll see like a hand on a ledge, or you'll see him through a window or something. And this is very reminiscent to me of that. It's not that he jumps out, but just that there's always something in the background. And I think that's a little fascinating.
Well, because there's things that I was watching too where a character walked through a hallway and I was like, wait a minute, did that? And then they go back there. It's like, oh, I actually did. That's awesome. So there's these things that, almost have like a haunted mansion type element to it.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it grounds you in characters you care about and that you like. So there is some tension there. Even if you have a story that's set in 92 and 2018, so that a character that's alive in 2018 didn't die in 92, there is still some element of tension to what's happening.
Yeah.
And this show does what all TV series kind of do in that it sets up a lot of, gives you one side of an event early on and makes you wait until much later in the series to get the full scope of what happened to understand.
Yeah.
And I think that works very well because I think getting those little slices are a lot scarier and more effective than getting the entirety of what's happening. Yeah. And it builds towards that.
This is kind of a little bit of a mixture of. I don't think this is a spoiler, but it's kind of if you like the Shining Stanley Kubrick movie, you could be a fan of this as well because there are very similar elements.
I mean, there are some similar elements.
Because, does the house drive you crazy? Similar to does the...
Well, how much is the individual versus the environment?
And I think that's some of the more interesting stuff in it to me as well, because, I got glimpses of that. Because even in The Shining, there are, toward the end when the house, when you're fully aware of everything that's going on.
Yeah.
Shelley Duvall is running around, and there's a bunch of weird stuff she sees.
So have you seen...
And I think that makes it enjoyable, too.
Have you seen this one video that's been making the rounds on social media of... It's just a 3-minute video of Shelley Duvall saying, "Hi, I'm Shelley Duvall," for a bunch of different TV appearances and stuff. It's very interesting. But so seeing this show does make me have a lot of confidence in Mike Flanagan to do Dr. Sleep, which was the novel sequel novel to The Shining. And I think what they said was for that movie, their plan was to pay homage to the Kubrick film and to the book and to take it in a different direction.
It's just funny because we talked about this before. Stephen King hates the Kubrick version.
Yeah.
And to me, that is one of the staples of horror. It's one of the best of all time.
One of the most iconic movies. I mean, it's so iconic that, a modern blockbuster movie used that as part of a huge set piece because it's so iconic and people remember it. So I think it's one of those things where, so The Shining is set in the Overlook Hotel, and it's kind of about Jack Torrance and kind of his descent. I know the book was more about alcoholism and his demons and trying to walk the right path and things like that, as opposed to the movie just seems more like Jack Nicholson's sneering and just boiling under the surface to begin with.
Yeah.
But the environment is so, engrossing, and that's what drives a lot of that story. And it feels like Haunting of Hill House
takes a little bit out of that because it feels that way.
Because it takes, it's not, they're not sectioned off in some hotel that's in a snowed in area where they literally can't leave and they have to be 100% control of it. Yeah. It's a house that they are occupying while they're updating to flip it and to turn a profit.
But it kind of consumes their life.
But it doesn't. So in the 92 stuff, like you don't see much of their life outside of the house.
Yeah.
You only really see that in the present day as people have drifted away from the house. So I think that a lot of that element, even though they're able to leave at any time in the 90s,
it doesn't feel.
It feels like they're kind of stuck there because of the home.
Yeah, and I feel like the way that the home is, it just maybe feels like it's so far out from everything else that it's not really convenient to just come and go.
Yeah.
You know, and one thing too that just makes me a little want even more is seeing the way they've done the house. And I hate to bring Resident Evil back up, but you look at Resident Evil 1 and it's like, man, you know, like they can do this. Why can't they just do it the right way? Because you can do, because like the Resident Evil 1 and the way this house feels, like the houses don't make sense. Because you look at the way, and that was on purpose, but you look at the way this house is, like it doesn't make sense.
Well, the way,
and there's hallways of nowhere. I really love that.
But there are houses that were built in like the Victorian era that are kind of like that because there's that one house. It's like in San Francisco or something.
The Winchester house.
The Winchester house that was built like that. And I'm sure, like if you listen, like there's like a lore episode about it. And there's a bunch of different shows that have covered.
About
they
it
had
too.
with Helen Mirren and stuff. So there's houses that have that kind of weird architecture. And this, show feels like that type of house.
Yeah.
But it's just one that doesn't have as much of like a notorious history. So people buying it wouldn't really know that about it.
Yeah.
But then again, like I do wonder, like in the fiction of the show, how much they bought that house for to flip it. Because as large as it is, I don't like, even being set in 92, I'm not sure what property values would have been in that area back then.
Well, it's one of those things too, though. Like, is it because they were outsiders? So it's a possibility because there is like a point where the sheriff kind of references the house where he's like, everybody always asks questions about it. So is it, maybe all the locals are like, yeah, we're not going to mess with it. Where somebody outside comes in, they get it for a decent enough price that, because the way I kind of took it is like every bit of money they had was sunk into that house.
And then they're going to flip the house.
Yeah.
But I mean, then again, that's the plot and that's the setup for a lot of stories.
But
they sink all their money into this house that's a great deal that they shouldn't be able to afford, but for some reason it's right at the right price. I mean, because that's all kinds of stories like Amityville Horror, like all kinds of stuff. But the difference is this house is such a large entity; it's even like its own character in the story. And type like Resident Evil or things. This is very much a haunted house story that has very creepy elements in it. And that's like a perfect setting for a creepy video game to be like created out of this.
Well, was it Pitch Dark? What's the video game?
Pitch Black.
Pitch Black, is that the one for the GameCube?
Or
Eternal Darkness.
Eternal Darkness.
This kind of reminded me of Eternal Darkness a little bit because that was like a big house, and it's funny. It's like I wonder. Obviously, you've probably always had scary tales that took places, even going way back a long time ago, because we used to have castles and stuff, and you go to Europe and crap. But I kind of love those because he said it's almost like it's a character in itself.
Because you go here, because something too to look into in the United States, like you have houses that were built during the early settlement of America in the colonial era, but the oldest house or the oldest structures that are made in America by, people like not Native Americans, in terms of like buildings and churches and structures, they're hundreds of years old. There's stuff in Europe that's thousands of years. And I think there's just a difference in history because no matter how old something is in the U.S., there's just stuff in Europe where it's just that much older. And there's been all kinds of stuff that happened. But as opposed to like, but this show did make the house feel like it had a very rich history, even if it wasn't that old. Like,
because I kind of, from what I gather, is maybe the house was built in late 1800s, early 1900s. I wouldn't think it'd be that much because, like, we have the benefit of we live in Louisville, and most people know Waverly
Hills, San Antonio,
and that was in the 1920s. So I don't think the house was that much older than that.
Yeah, I mean, because like Waverly is its own thing. I don't know. That's a place that is an interesting historical location, thing like that. It's been all those ghost hunter shows. There was that one movie that was made there a few years ago that I would not recommend checking out. It was
not good. Did they show it on Sci-Fi before? Or
they did, and
that's where I watched it.
And I remember being excited for it, but you can just look into that movie if you want to. But I just think a lot of times, like with real life locations, it just doesn't work because in real life, like, you have to suspend disbelief. I'd much rather be just like a fictional place that feels like a real place.
Just talking about like where they went and found this house, like there was just some house in Georgia, and they were only allowed to shoot on the outside, but they just kind of went and found it.
Yeah.
So I would assume they probably did all the shots of the outside at one time, or were in a very close vicinity to each other.
Yeah.
Because apparently, like, the people were okay with them shooting the outside, they wouldn't shoot the inside. So that was kind of cool, because he said, like, the way they found it, like, it just didn't really fit in. It just kind of was very odd.
Well, I think the interior part of it, they built sets.
Yes, they built sets, yeah.
Because the director, Mike Flanagan, on the behind-the-scenes special that I watched, was talking about how they built the entire set with some of the later episode stuff in mind in terms of how those will play out. And that's very clear, because you would have to have it very well thought out, because, you know, like us just working on small-scale short film stuff, a lot of times the geography of a place really limits what you can do.
Yeah.
So if you want to, you know, follow a character down a hallway, you need to make sure there's, like, space to have lights up above and all this stuff that you need to think about. So the set itself, like, I would love to have been able to visit the set. And two, like, so something like Crimson Peak was the Guillermo del Toro movie from a couple years ago.
Is that similar to this? Because I know it's gothic horror as well.
So that was actually set, though, like, in the early 1900s.
Yeah, I mean, not as far. I'm saying we just kind of feel and vibe, because I have not watched that. I kind of want to, then, like, I don't know if I'm going to watch it.
No, it's an enjoyable movie, and it has, like, Jessica Chastain, Tom Hiddleston, and some others. I think Mia Wachowski is the main. But so that movie is, you know, a character that goes to this kind of really creepy gothic style house and learns about the literal ghosts and demons and skeletons in the closet of the house, and that builds towards the end of the story, and that brings it to the conclusion. And this story, I think, is kind of like that, in that you have, I mean, this one is not nearly as, like, moody and set piece, you know, set in the early 1900s or whatever. It's set, you know, in the 90s and present day.
Yeah.
But this movie is also more character driven, because there's more characters and there's more interaction between related family, and there's less really of unraveling of a mystery and just understanding what actually took place.
Yeah.
So there, I mean, it's a little bit different, because there is no real huge twist in this show. It's just kind of general developments and learning more and more about the family.
Yeah.
In the house.
I mean, there is a couple of very good twists. You know, maybe.
I mean, there definitely are things
but
that
it's
are.
not that's like extreme. I don't know. There's
no
midway through. There's a really good one.
There's no Sixth Sense style twist. I was just saying it's more like gradual revelations that build towards a story, and it's one of those things where if you want, you know, some ghost scares, it's like a perfect show to watch during the month of October. So you still have some time.
And I would recommend too, when you watch it, do not watch it during the day. And the reason why I say that is not just because of October, but there's so much in this that takes place in the darkness that if you are even if you like, because like in my living room, even if I have the shades closed and you miss a lot.
There is a certain amount of light that gets in, and and that's something too. It's like kind of a goofy thing. But like all the time that I watched this show was at night.
Yeah.
And this is definitely a show that when I was watching this with Julie, we were both watching it and didn't want to stop. We're like, what time is it?
Yeah,
we can stay up for another hour.
This is almost, I think the shortest episodes are 45 minutes, and about the regular is almost about an hour.
Because some of them were a little bit over an hour.
Yeah.
So I think that too, like these streaming series, I think it's nice that the episodes are as long as they need to be. They don't have to stick to a strict formula and cut or extend things out.
And I like this show too, because after watching all of it as a whole, there's no fat in it. You know, there's nothing where like, oh, they could got rid of that. There's not really, everything is progressing the story. There is nothing that feels like, you know, one of my critiques of Ash vs. Evil Dead Season 1 is there's like 2 episodes where they literally stood in one spot that was like a 12 by 12 little area and didn't move.
Well, I mean,
there's none of that. There's no Walking Dead crap where, you know.
So too, like I think about, there were some more twists than I was initially thinking. Now I'm remembering it, but it's not really hinged on that. That's just like layering the story. Yeah. And like you said, so even though it's a 10-episode season, I think they've said that if they were to do another season of it, it wouldn't be on the same family.
Yeah,
it'd be a different story.
Mike Flanagan said it would not be about.
So I do like the idea of just having a self-contained story that has a beginning, middle, and end, and concludes.
Yeah,
and then
because that's refreshing. Because I do think, you know, Netflix does not release viewership numbers.
Yeah.
But I'm going to assume, just from the massive amount of stuff I've seen on just people I know on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and other bigger media publications, I would say this was like a home run for them.
Well, because it's one of those things where it's gotten a lot of mind share, because a lot of times when TVs, I think Netflix series, because they've been canceling a lot of series recently, but I think what happened with them for a while was a lot of things were hitting big and being cultural impacts and, things everybody talked about for weeks, like Stranger Things and Orange is the New Black and House of Cards and all these shows. I think this one came out at the perfect time. It came out towards, the beginning part of October, so you had most of the month, and it's delivering. If people want horror, it's delivering it. It's not gory. There is a little bit of stuff here and there that might make people be like, but there's no, it's not anywhere near as gory as even the new Halloween. There's not really like slasher type gore. It's more of ghost and scares, and it's character centered, so people who aren't huge horror fans can still enjoy it. And I've heard a lot of people watching the show and they get too scared when they're watching it. Now, it's not really trying to sound like, I'm a badass because I don't get scared, but when you watch a lot of this stuff, you don't really get scared by it.
You do get desensitized to it some. Now, I will say, like, we both have basements, and that's where I do my laundry at. Now, in my house, when I bought it, there is a military nurse bag in the basement. That was the only thing that was left in the house. So we don't mess with that, and then we don't touch it. So it's in the corner, and I always we keep our eye on it because it creeps us out.
So,
after watching this, we're like, and we had done a new mattress. It was one of the ones that you get through that comes in the box, and the box is stood up. So we're just gonna tear that down because it would creep.
So my basement. So for the short film shared that we did, there's the part where there's a creature in the basement, and I shot that by myself. So I set the lights up and the camera up and everything up and hit record. Had the costume on. Had to zip it up and put it on completely and go stand in the basement in the dark. Yeah. And then just crawl up. I couldn't see anything. I could just feel where I was at. So that was a little bit unnerving. But that was just more because I didn't want to fall on the steps. And I didn't want to knock my camera equipment over and stuff. Yeah. But, the show, I think, is very good at setting up and, doing effective scares. Because even though there weren't, I wasn't sitting there, crawling out of my skin or scared. Some people are. But there were effective jump scares that were earned.
Yes, that's the best thing about this.
It's not
earned.
It's not like a cat jumping into frame or somebody... shuts the basement or shuts the door and there's somebody in the mirror behind them, stuff like that. So it had effectively developed scares. And
the Poltergeist, the remake where the squirrel was the biggest scare of the movie.
Yeah, so it doesn't have any of that. The scares are legit. It is something that is meant to be shocking if it does that. So it has that element. Yeah, I think we can kind of get into finishing up our thoughts before going to spoilers, because to me, I think that the criticism I've seen on the internet in the past few days, just looking through Facebook, is I've seen a few people who love the show but were disappointed in the ending and the way that it concluded. But I think that anybody that has watched really any amount of these types of stories in terms of movies or series or books or whatever, there's a few directions you can go. And I think that the direction this show does go in, some people didn't like it because they wanted to go in the opposite direction. But having watched movies or read books or stuff where that happens, I think they would have walked away from that unsatisfied too. Yeah. So it's kind of one of these things where it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. So not saying what this ending is, but you can have something where, you have narrative closure and the majority of the characters live and they do it by coming together and they, blah, 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 and that's how the story ends. Or you can have where everybody just kind of dies and the demonic presence or the ghost presence is never really explained and it just kills people and they're dead. Yeah. So you can kind of have those two general directions for the ending for these types of stories. Kind of, there's a lot of stuff in between, but those are generally the kind of directions they go. Yeah. And I think that either direction is going to upset it could upset the exact same people. Yeah. They just say, "Oh, you did this. I would rather this," and then if you do this, they're like, "I would rather that." So I think that a lot of this people kind of came away to some extent saying, "Oh, I didn't like the way this went. I wish it had done this." And watching it, I was like, to me, it concluded in a way that I was satisfied with.
I don't know if you can conclude it any other way than what they did, because what I like about this is, and this is not spoiler, the story came to a close.
Yeah, it wasn't like huge dangling threads. Yes, it's done.
And I think a lot of times, and we talked about this with Halloween last week, people do not have the gumption sometimes to do that because everything is always money. Sequels. This, that. Whereas this is like, But
I like if the approach to this was when Mike Flanagan got hired on to do it or pitched it or whatever. If the approach was, we're going to make one season with this family and it's it's a complete story. We're not planning to sequelize it or whatever. We want this story to be told from beginning to end, and that is it. To me, that's great because I think that gives you the concept of finality and, you know, being not afraid to do storytelling and to, you know, to have characters' fates be up in the air. You don't have to worry about for season 3 considerations. You're just doing the show.
And I just think in this world that we live in now with, you know, and especially something like Stranger Things or, you know, whatever, like, I don't know if they knew this was going to be as big as it is. And maybe they did. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's kind of nice to see, like, even regardless of whatever, they had a solid idea and they did it to completion. And that's it. And you don't always get that in today, you know, because like you said, everything's always sequelitis. You know, what's this or that? The only thing I could see as being similar to is maybe American Horror Story, where...
Well, I was going to say, like, comparing... if you want to compare this to recent shows, like American Horror Story Season 1, which was the Murder House, or Season 5, which was the Hotel Cortez or whatever, I think those 2 seasons you could kind of compare to this, but I vastly prefer this because it kept a consistent tone throughout. It didn't have the flamboyant, stylish elements that completely wreck any of the scares. It didn't have people running around in rubber suits or Lady Gaga or anything. I mean, it was more grounded in the characters. So to me, I vastly prefer this show to any season of American Horror Story, and especially like to those seasons that have the most comparable stories, because I think a lot there may have been some similar ground that both series tread at some point.
Yeah.
But to me, The Haunting of Hill House kept it more grounded in the characters and kept me engaged, because American Horror Story has a tendency for me to start out engaging and to fall apart. This started out engaging, and some of the most shocking moments were in the back half of the season.
Yeah. Which, that's one thing I like about this, too, is, like, to me, there is no episode you watch, you get nothing out of it.
But
everything is pretty solid.
I think the big thing for a lot of people is I think the thing that will be the biggest thing that paints somebody, you know, against liking this show is if you don't want anything revealed about the ghost at all, and you don't want anything to be to be brought to your attention about the supernatural element, then I think that, you know, a series that's 10 episodes long, they will delve into some things. And
there's still a lot of unanswered
there's
questions.
a lot of, you know, there is a lot of stuff that's up in the air. It's like, well, where did this come from? There's no backstory on this, which is great because there's some elements you just don't know, and it's just there. Some elements you do know a little bit more about, but you don't find out everything you need to know. It's just some elements get a little bit of illumination on it, some don't. Some people want nothing to get illumination, everybody just to die horribly. And it's like, well, that's not really good storytelling if there's not, you know, a point to it. Yeah, so to me, I like the show a lot. I know, like, earlier, before I got back over here, I was asking Julie, it's like, what would you give it out of 10? She said she would give, like, an 8 or 9, just ranking the season as a whole. And, I was like, I fall in line with that. I think, like, at least an 8, because I really enjoyed it. The performances were great. You know, it had great performances from the child actors and all that. I mean, some of the characters are a little bit frustrating for a little while, but then they kind of grow on you as you just kind of get to see what their angle on life is, and you get more of the illumination into why they're thinking what they're thinking. And then it was just, you know, by the end of it, those character arcs have been made more satisfying. So, you know, I think the ending, to me, once again, I think these stories, you can only go in a few different directions. And to me, this closed it up well enough, and it kept it tied into these different themes. So to me, it made sense. And I came out enjoying it, and I didn't, you know, have a huge problem with how it ended or anything. Because I think a lot of times with horror, the big problem is the ending.
Yeah.
How many horror movies blow it by the ending?
And that's the thing. And, like, where I'm at on the rating on this is, I'm going to show my hands for our end of the year podcast too. 10 out of 10. I mean, it was something that, you know, I don't even really know why I started watching it. I've hurt my shoulder, and I've been out of work for a couple weeks now, so I just haven't had much to do. So I just started watching it. Me and Courtney finished it, and it kept me engaged all the way through. I will say this is a little bit of a slow burn, but there's always enough going on that it keeps you engaged.
Well, character-wise, you learn stuff.
You learn stuff, and all the characters are interesting and engaging, and I think most people can relate to some of the characters in one form or another.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's the, I guess, the pro of having a large family in this show is that everybody can probably find at least one character they connect to in some way or
There's some element of each of the characters' struggle and personality that you may be able to identify
They
with.
are all flawed. There's no perfect character in this, you know, which I think was also...
Which is realistic.
Yeah, which is realistic. And, you know, by the end of the series, everybody all their flaws mostly stem from the experiences in the house.
Well, because everybody's person, like I have flaws, like every person has flaws, but a lot of things would get, when you have like this traumatic thing that happened to your family, dealing with like this house and all the stuff that happened, that would cause everybody to have some fallout from that. And I think that show is, it developed those characters out well, and it touched on a lot of things. It just made them grounded, and there's some element of each character that somebody can identify with or find something.
I just think I look at this, and to me, this has set a new bar for just like, I mean, this isn't really an anthology. I don't know what it is, but just like where it's a multi-episode horror. Like, to me, this has set the bar very high. And I don't know if I even want a second season.
Yeah, I kind of would just like it to be what it is.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And to me, that is...
Because you could do like a prequel, I guess.
Yeah, but I just think that this is the rare thing where it's something I enjoyed so much, I don't want any more of it.
Yeah, I mean...
And it's kind of like, everybody's done this. You get a really good food dish, or you get a piece of cake, and you get the perfect size and eat it. And you know what? I'm going to eat another piece. Then you have too much. And to me, this is just like, I don't know if I could have anything more. I don't want to say this is perfect because it's not perfect, but it was so much of what I wanted, even though I didn't really realize it. I don't want any more of it.
Well, I think
I'm very happy with it.
A huge endorsement is you were somebody that had seen some of Mike Flanagan's movies coming in,
and I was not
and you
hot
weren't
on
super hot on him, and this brought you out probably super excited for what he does with Dr. Sleep and his future
and just
work.
His future work, because to me, it's like to watch somebody do that, what he did with this, and this also is a credit to his staff of writers as well, and everybody involved. But to me, this was, because this is vastly different from the source material. But I think that the way
the 1999 movie, The Haunting we talked about, this bears very little resemblance to those. It takes some character names.
Yeah.
Because like Theo is the character that Catherine Zeta-Jones played. Yeah. So it takes character names, but it kind of really shifts around what that story was.
Because like there is a Hugh Crane, but anyway, they kind of just took a... Because this follows more along the lines of like Scary Movie 2. The original, where it's like the doctor's investigating the house, invites everybody to it. That's more of the original book.
Of The Haunting.
Yeah, and this is more like
the doctor. So there's, and you'll see some familiar faces pop up in other parts of it too. But so it sounds like, Derek gave it a 10 out of 10. I think, to me, it's like an 8.5. Like, it's really good. I would need to rewatch it. But the fact that I would give a series, I don't know, maybe I'll go 9, because I really did enjoy it. Because it's one of those series where I want to rewatch it, and that's not something I often do. Even with stuff I really enjoy, I often don't come away saying I need to rewatch this. But with this, I really do want to take the time to go back through.
And to me, like, and this is something even said the podcast, like, to me, and I think maybe you might be like this as well, like, and if you're not, you can correct me. But like, my holy grail of a movie that's never been made properly is Resident Evil, the original house one.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like, I'm willing to like give that man that movie. Let him do it.
Give him a haunted house.
Yeah, because like the thing that made Resident Evil work,
the first one is
all the elements of this. Because if you go back and you play that game, it is more of a character-driven.
It's like
drama.
a haunted mansion.
Yeah, it's more like a mansion with monsters. And to me, it's like, but again, the most effective stuff in it was the character elements. So I looked at what he did with that and said, you know what? Give this man that movie. Let him do it. Actually, don't even do a movie. I'd rather see it in a 10 show series.
Yeah.
But that won't happen. But that's just something that I'll go watch, and it's like, that's how highly I thought of this.
Yeah.
And that really changed my complete feelings of him as a director.
Yeah.
Because nothing I've seen so far was like, that's where I watched this, and I'm like, man, that was one of the best things I've watched in horror this year.
Yep. So that'll wrap up our non-spoiler discussion of The Haunting of Hill House. Now we're going to move into our spoilers. So if you haven't seen the show yet, then this point would recommend you jumping out, because you really don't want a lot of this stuff spoiled for you, because it's a good show to... When you're watching a movie, sometimes like getting stuff spoiled isn't a huge deal, but a TV series, if you have stuff spoiled in episode 1...
It kind of takes the fun out of the entire series.
Because you want to watch it for the first time all the way through. So I tried to avoid any spoilers. Once I watched the first episode and was in, I didn't want to know anything else about it. Yeah. And people kept sharing stuff, so I was like, okay, I need to avoid this, and that's why we tried to watch it as quickly as possible.
All right, so now we're in spoilers.
Full spoilers.
Before you knew, because before I had known anything, there were ghosts in the background. Was there any one scene where you're watching, you're kind of like, oh shit, there's something in the background, before you were aware of it on social media?
I think there's a few scenes where I was like, wait a minute, that's in the background. And then I don't remember what episode it was. Maybe it was the one where, I can't remember if it was in the earlier part of the season or the later part of the season, where Hugh goes to get Stevie and then the statues are looking, or there's the two statues like on the corner of like the walls are like looking straight ahead.
Yeah.
And when he goes past, one of them's like looking towards them.
Yeah.
And then he goes back past later, and it's not.
Yeah.
So there's stuff like that you can see throughout.
The first thing that I caught in each episode is kind of character specific for a majority of the season.
There'll be like one that's focused on a specific character.
Like,
of the
like
cast.
the first episode was a Stevie episode, then the fifth one was Nelly, and then each one, I think third was Theo. Each one usually follows a specific person until you have kind of like 10 episodes that kind of center on everybody.
Yeah.
But the first one where I really noticed something, which is kind of bad because this is later on into the series, was Hugh's specific episode, which actually has the least amount of ghosts in all of them. With the exception of maybe 8 doesn't have any. Because you can go through and like give an official count of each episode now.
Yeah.
But it's when he finds the body behind the wall and he leans in and then you see the blonde-headed, long-haired ghost.
Yeah.
Did you notice that?
I don't remember.
Well, if you go back and watch it, it's like, I think right when he leans in to look at what's in there, you'll see a long-haired, blonde-headed woman.
I remember that.
And then, so I had like rewind it and pause it, like, holy shit. Because that was like really cool. Because, and that's again where I was saying, like, that's why spoilers to me could ruin it, because it's so cool to organically find that stuff and then not, because you never know who that is. Like, there's no explanation who that
and then like
is.
the Hat Man, you don't know.
The Hat Man is the guy he found in the wall.
Okay.
Because, when Theo was kind of having her moment when we went back into the house and she was unconscious and they all had their little like realities that the house made up for them.
Yeah.
And she's with what ends up being her girlfriend, and she's telling her the story about the guy that like bricked himself in and you had guilt and whatever.
Yeah.
That was describing him. And remember how I said he wanted to become the tallest person and then he was really tall? That kind of all ties into his
Yeah, but I mean, like some of the stuff's like the subtext of the show, and then you like the kind of flapper girl, you find out like what her story is.
Yeah.
And then there's some of them though you don't really get background on.
Like the long-haired, blonde-headed ghost. Like you see her multiple times in the background because she was also behind everybody when the sheriffs were there. If you look at the back wall, there's like a shot where you can see her peeking around the corner. So it's just stuff like that what makes it so cool is like the house is haunted. There are ghosts in there. You don't know who they all are. And there's not always an explanation needed for them.
Well, and two, and it's completely unknown the balance between, does the family see and interact with the ghost more because they're more sensitive to the supernatural?
Yeah,
so how much is environment versus...
Yeah. And like Hugh at the beginning was the least, I guess, sensitive.
Yeah.
Because like in his episode, that's why he had the least amount of ghosts in it. Because he just... I think as it went on, and when you get the big reveal at the end, then obviously he is fully aware of what it is and knows everything about it.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, he is kind of aloof to like everything that's going on because he's probably, most people would be, is like, yeah, it's not real.
Well, like kids seeing a ghost or whatever, I'm sure as a kid, most people thought they saw something they didn't, or just imagined things or played things up. And then two, but he was at least respectful and trying just to help, like his kids, like, oh, don't be afraid to be in your room and stuff like that. But then, the bent neck lady is something where that's like a big twist where you find out who that is.
Well, we can say it's Nell, you know. But I think the way they did it was brilliant because
they did the build up and they didn't really hint at that at all.
No, you never. And then, it kind of is Doctor Who-esque when she becomes a bent neck lady, because you see her travel through time as it happens. And then she is aware on both ends, that she is watching herself in younger forms, realizing everything is going, which I think that was really smart.
Two, like, so talk about like there wasn't some twist. Like there's like that was a twist. And then when Stevie and his dad Hugh were talking, and he's like, I've read your book, and he's like, this is especially dangerous for you because there was no treehouse. There was no guy fixing the clock. Yeah. And then so you realize like all the stuff as kids. So the dancing room, like all the stuff that the kids had specific to them that you kind of see in these like the prior episodes and flashbacks. Yeah, we're all in the red room.
Well, one thing that's kind of cool is you have the Dudleys, and you have the housekeeper, Miss Dudley, and the guy that kind of helps you.
Annabeth Gish, who was from the X-Files when David Duchovny left, she's one of the characters that came on.
Yeah, and it was kind of cool though for them because like Stevie at one point was talking about the game room, and she's like, game room? Yeah. And like, as you found out, like, those rooms didn't exist. It was the red room kind of manipulating them. And I think it was kind of funny though, because there are hints throughout the entire series that is possible. Because one thing you notice is in the dance room, the game room, the reading room. The one thing they never really showed was from Shirley's perspective, which was like the living room until the very end. But it was all the room was the same dimension with the same window.
Yeah.
And even the treehouse is the same way. But, you don't, once you realize, like, oh, shit, it's all the same. But you don't really get that until the reveal at the end.
Yeah, and then, like, the character Stevie or Steve, I mean, like, people had found him to be kind of a character they didn't agree with much or thought was just being a complete jerk throughout the beginning of the show. But as you fill more of it in throughout, that becomes a more fully fleshed out character. So even he has some, elements where people could identify with.
Because he is kind of the author of the family that was an unsuccessful writer, and then at one point, even though he was not a believer, he wrote the story of Hill House. And it turned out there would be like a breakaway hit and got a lot of money, and then some people in the family took the money that they got, their royalties, and some didn't.
Yeah.
But, which I think that's kind of something we can play off of Halloween when you had the podcasters on that, is a take on a guy who went and, kind of publicize other people's stories for money, whether or not he believed them, and, even there's one scene where he's at a woman's house and she's talking about her husband. And the way he kind of played him is, even though he's an author, he also kind of debunked their ghost stories.
Yeah, I would say, well, here's what's probably what was happening.
Then he kind of let her in, like, even though I don't believe in this, I will write
the book.
So on that end, he's kind of, maybe an ass, but...
Well, I mean, yeah. So you have these elements where you kind of get more depth to these characters. I mean, some of the characters people were more, were more likable off the bat.
Yeah.
And some of you didn't really know much about, like Nellie, until later on.
Yeah.
And we'll say like the very first episode, it's like, wait a minute, is this Nellie or Theo? Like all these characters. But then once you get a little bit of time with everybody, like, okay, they're all distinctive.
Is there any
people.
one scene that, or ghost or whatever, that really stuck with you and you thought was something that, like, if you had to recommend this series based upon one thing?
Well, something I think that watching it through, I forget one of the earlier episodes exactly which one it was, but when it shows Hugh getting Stevie out of the room and taking him out of the house, and as they're leaving, you see like a woman running in the background in like a flowy dress, and you don't know anything about it. Like, that was creepy.
Yeah.
And with no context, it's like, shit, what's going on?
Yeah, and you find out later on, of course, that was the mom.
And then you find out later on what the context to it was. So I think like that is like a moment. I think showing somebody like the tall hat man moment with Luke under his bed and stuff, like that's a moment that's really effective.
Yeah, because I think that's the best thing about this show is, like, how many ghost movies have we watched? Or ghost outside of 13 Ghosts,
the remake.
Yeah, the remake. I can't really think of movies that were ghost based
that
where you
show you as much.
Showed ghosts and or hinted at it or gave you anything, because a lot of these hauntings, either one, they're invisible, your paranormal activities and all the things that spawned, or like your haunting of Connecticut or all that other crap. Even the Conjuring films, like, very seldom actually give you a ghost.
Well, I think
or an entity that you can physically see.
They will show you them in glimpses, and that happened like the Nun part and the Crooked Man and other parts in the Conjuring too. I mean, like Insidious had like the kind of devil
Insidious
creature.
was a little different because they showed you more,
and that was in the spectral realm and the astral projection and stuff. So I think there's different movies that have showed you elements of it, but this is just kind of taking that and spreading it across an entire series.
Yeah.
And like the episode like 6 at the funeral home, like that was an accomplishment. That was a feat.
Well, that was when we were talking about in the non-spoiler section, where like you have a bunch of long shots, and there's like one scene where Hugh comes in and it's the first time he's seen his kids as an adult.
Yeah, or seen them all in a while.
Yeah, all in a while. And it's a cool shot because he comes in and then he still sees them as children. And then they do like a 360 and they come back and it's the adults.
Yeah.
And reading behind the scenes stuff, like the way they shot that scene was they literally had everybody waiting off set. And then as they spun the camera around, everybody ran and got in place.
Yeah.
So I thought that was like really cool. And then you have where they made the set go into the other set.
Yeah.
And it's just like a long follow shot of him like walking in and seeing the past happen. And just that episode alone to me is worth recommending the entire series, because that is just such a well shot. I haven't really seen much like
it's
that.
a feat of cinematography, because there are one takes in a lot of things. There's a lot of short films that are one takes, and a lot of different movies, like the new Halloween had like a one take segment. Not the same scope as this or the same.
And this
intention.
is a television show essentially.
Yeah, and I'll be interested to see what the budget was, because I mean there was some CG work throughout. None of it was super obvious or terrible.
Yeah.
But they had a lot of things going on, but just the practical set element just makes me yearn for more movies that are like this, because a lot of times, in these ghost movies, they set them in this big old house, and
Nothing happens.
And not a lot happens, and then they leave the house, and then the story ends. I mean, so this one actually had a lot more happening in the house.
Yeah.
Because going back to recent podcasts, we're trying to think like, what are movies that after watching this show you can go watch the movie? Like The Changeling is something that comes to mind. Granted, The Changeling shows a lot less in terms of ghost than this does.
Yeah.
But it's another one where there's kind of an emotional journey where you find out why what happened.
Yeah.
And that was loosely based on what was claimed to be a true story, The Changeling was. So there's different, The Exorcist is something I think of that stays kind of scary from beginning to end and doesn't really shed much light on the demon.
Yeah.
So it's a different type of thing than this. This is vastly superior to the 1999 movie.
Well, the one thing too, where this reminds me of The Shining in an aspect, is the mom has essentially the shine. I'll say it. That's what
the ability to see supernatural elements,
and because she kind of has a combination of, because it's the daughters that are the more sensitive.
Yeah.
So like Theo can touch and
she can touch
see
things and get a feeling.
Shirley can dream about things, whereas I think the mom is able to do a little bit of all of that. And
so it made them more sensitive to the supernatural elements in that house.
And Nell had an ability too. I forgot what hers was at this point, but she had something because the mom brought it up too. But
then, Olivia, the mom, towards the end, kind of got driven by the spirits to believe
one spirit in particular, which was the flapper woman. I can't think of her name.
Who tried to convince her that her kids were in a dangerous dream.
Is very much similar to The Shining, because you had the one main evil spirit that was kind of convinced him of the same thing to kill his family. Which with her, it was the ghost that convinced her that if she let those kids leave, they were going to die. So the best way to keep them from dying is to then kill all of them.
Yeah, so it built that up. So it showed that she was she was a tragic figure, in that she was a loving mother that kind of got driven by this house to kind of Jack Torrance levels, or I don't know, not to the same level as him.
I mean, actually, she was successful in a way, because
she killed Abigail, the daughter of the Dudleys,
which was, to me, was also a really good twist, because you had
thought
seen
that was
glimpses of Abigail,
and you thought that she was just a ghost or an invisible friend, but it's an actual girl.
There was a scene where Shirley's in the statue room, and in the background you can see a short bobbed hair, blonde headed little girl in the background.
Yeah.
So you're like, oh, okay, that's a ghost. And then it kind of gives you glimpses of Abigail, and they reference her. But again, with all the other ghosts, that's just a ghost.
Yeah.
But then the last episode, you see that she
was a real person, and then
she
became a ghost.
Yeah, then she became a ghost because the mom takes him to the red room and poisons him with tea. And that's kind of like when the shit hits the fan as far as the house just going full supernatural, because that's when the dad actually becomes aware of all the ghosts.
Yeah, and then he sees, and then you had towards the end where Stevie, when he's leaving the house, there's all the ghosts of the house behind him. So that's when you probably have to go back and hit pause and look and see what all of them are.
Yeah, because there's different little scenes too. The mom is supposed to be going to visit her sister, and they're all
goes to the
they're all at the end of the stairwell.
Yeah,
and then as they do a pan over of everybody, when you look into the right room, you can see two ghosts just standing there. And I think that's where this is so effective, because it's always there. Regardless of the type of scene that's going on, the ghosts are always there.
Well, then, too, whenever the dad tells Steve, that there was no clock repairman there, then you see him in a lot of scenes after that. Yeah. Just in the background.
Because the dad's explanation was, that clock was a very specific, rare clock, and only, a handful of people in the world could have worked on it.
And they didn't have the money. Or if they did have it repaired, the guy would have came and took it out away.
Yeah. So that guy didn't exist.
There's a lot of cool stuff like that. So it's a show that definitely I want to go back and rewatch and just look for all the elements. Yeah. And the episode 6 is, from the filmmaker's perspective, is, something that you watch that episode and you just think of the logistics of it. Yeah. Because, it's hard enough to do a stationary camera on a tripod, one take of a dialogue scene that turns out well, because granted, they have a post-production budget. They could probably fix it if somebody dipped a microphone into the screen. They could probably with CGI fix that or whatever, but shoot on cameras that are 6K or something so you can crop in and keep quality. But all of that stuff, just from a filmmaker perspective, something that is worth investing in and seeing. Because
I'm not one that talks about cinematography, but episode 6 in particular is phenomenal from that aspect.
Yeah, it's a feat that I don't think your mom or your aunt who doesn't watch or care about filmmaking, they probably won't think about that element. Is it's just like, oh, there's like a very kinetic scene that was kind of just crazy. And then I think the big thing that, like we said, when it comes down to the end of this, the thing that I've seen some people on Facebook that were talking about they didn't like the ending is that it ties together the family stuff to the house.
Yeah.
And then you get to kind of see what was going on with the house. And then you get a mostly happy ending where, you know, the dad sacrifices himself to save his kids and then stays there with his wife and his daughter, Nellie, who's already passed away. And they get to live there together in the house. Yeah. So you get to see that element, which is kind of like a happy ending, and you get a little bit more insight into the house, and then you understand that like the dad's deal with the Dudleys when they found that their daughter was dead.
Yeah, there's a point where he's getting interviewed by the sheriff, and they talk about 3 missing hours.
Yeah,
and it takes multiple episodes to learn about the 3 missing hours, and that's because, you know,
he comes back, finds his dead wife, the Dudleys are there. So there's like that whole little element of he doesn't want to, because the Dudleys can still come and see the ghost of their daughter.
Well, their
every
deal
night.
was like, look, we will not report. Nobody knew she existed. We don't want your family to know this about your wife. So if you do not sell the house, let us keep taking care of it.
And don't let anyone else live here.
That way we can come see our daughter. We will not be an issue. And that was kind of the deal that was struck. That way his family did not know that they had to find out that their mom was a murderer. And, you know, it kind of kept him as the keeper of the secrets. You know, which I think it kind of makes the dad a little more sympathetic because it's like he really wasn't a bad guy,
and he really was keeping his kids from to find out negative stuff that might change their opinion of their mother because it was really the house and all these forces converging to kind of break her down and cause her to do something.
Poppy,
Poppy,
because at one scene that we didn't talk about that would it was from episode 6
and
it's where they're looking for Nell. And the mom goes upstairs, and he has to go get has to get battery or something. And then you kind of, it's like everything. It's where she kind of goes into the shine moment where she's able to see stuff in the house.
Yeah,
and she hears like a knocking, and the really creepy looking little boy comes out with the wheelchair.
Yeah,
and rolls down, and then she and then later on, you get to see glimpses of the sick woman in the bed. And then, like, later on, I think in episode 9 is when you find out that she was, like, telling her that Poppy's a liar. And
to not trust her.
Yeah, to not trust her. So it's like, while not every spirit in the house is maybe necessarily good, they're not all bad.
Yeah.
Her thing was that, you know, I don't really know where she lined up on the spectre spell of good or bad, but she was just trying to warn the mom, like, she is a liar, don't trust her.
Yeah, well, then you heard, like, with Poppy, like, in real life.
The Miss Deli's like, well, she was clinically insane.
Yeah, so, you know, so there's a lot of stuff to go back and rewatch.
Oh, and like the end, the Dudley, before she dies, the husband gets her in there so she can die in the house. And
then be a spirit with the kids.
Yeah.
So that's where it reminded me more of like American Horror Story.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I like the ending to me, like I liked it well enough. I mean, I guess
I'm happy with it.
People would have preferred that they kept it more mysterious and darker ending, a more downbeat ending. But I mean, this wasn't the type of story they were telling, I think. I mean, they could have gone that direction, but I liked what they did with it. And I think, like I said, with these types of stories, there's only so many ways it can go. Yeah. And I think if it had just been the house killed all of them, that would have been very unsatisfying.
To me, I think that'd be cheap. And, you know, I think the way they did this was, like, the end was very emotional. I mean, I think that most people could watch it and get something out of it.
Well, you came away feeling far more sympathetic for the dad, for Hugh Crane, than you did initially. Yeah. And, yes, I mean, a lot of that stuff I think worked out, and it was just an interesting story. And they had all the kind of false starts with like the visions that the kids were seeing in the house when they were kind of out of it. Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff there. I'm definitely gonna go back and rewatch it.
I think to me it's one of the standouts of the year. It's something that, you know, I kind of heard about. I didn't put much into it. I just kind of started watching because I really haven't had much else to do. And it's something that to me I don't know if I've watched anything better this year as far as horror goes.
Well, it's something that.
And it's something that stuck with me past watching, which I think that is, like, as good as Halloween is, like, there's not much meat on the bone there, so it doesn't really stick with you. When it's over, it's like, yeah, that was fun, but, you know, whereas something like this, now granted, this wasn't much longer and had a lot more material.
Yeah, it was a 10-episode series.
But, you know, like, or something like Mandy that you watch, it's like, at the end of that movie, there is still a lot to consider. There's a lot to think about. There's a lot to. You've watched Mandy?
Yeah, we did the episode.
Yeah, we did the episode. And but you know, all that stuff kind of runs together because we do so much of it. But It's like I kind of like stuff like that. Whereas like this one gives you a definitive end, which in horror community stuff, like I always can kind of applaud people for that, regardless of how the ending is. When it's a definitive end, and you know something that we kind of want to talk about. We talked about this before the spoilers. Like Mike Flanagan's already came out and said that storyline is done. And I think that is a smart thing because I don't know where you go from this point on.
Well, because if you have him sell the house and move in, that kind of defeats the purpose of the ending. And then I think if you do, I guess you could do a prequel series about some of the families lived there before that you didn't, like the kid in the wheelchair you don't know much about.
Which would be more the Poppy line.
Like I wonder if that was if that was like a reference to Changeling.
No, remember Poppy talked about her son, how he was in the wheelchair and he'd bang on the walls, and
yeah, that's true.
That was more. I think that was her son.
And I haven't read the book either. So
well, now the book is much different and doesn't cover. You know, I would like to read the book after watching the movie.
Because the Cranes were like different. They weren't. It was different characters. But yeah, so we need to go back and read the book too. But yeah, so the show, like to me, it went from something I remember hearing that Mike Flanagan was going to direct and Netflix was doing it, and be like, oh, that sounds interesting, and something I like kind of mildly was excited for. But then after watching, it's like, oh, okay, so this is great. This is something that I think will have staying power for them in the future, and it's something that, you know, everybody should check out and at least give a few episodes to see if you're interested.
The only thing that worries me about season 2 is like this one for me too is also unexpected. But it's like
it's hard to catch your lightning in the bottle twice.
Yeah.
Here, I mean, it's but with the show though, it's not as much catching lightning in the bottle because there's multiple episodes. Yeah. It's just trying to recreate the narrative push for it to exist again.
Yeah,
might be a little bit limited if you're doing a prequel that's these families that are already dead.
And because you know the end now, the means of how they got there is much different. Because you don't know.
But
the
then
full
again, like
story.
one of my favorite things has been Better Call Saul, one of my favorite shows, or you know,
and you know the end of that,
and that's a prequel to Breaking Bad, so you know the end point for the character. But they have had some Better Call Saul, some flashes past where Breaking Bad ended, years into the future. So there's stuff there, you know, at least months into the future after that show ended. So that's interesting. But so this show is something I mildly anticipated, but came away being really excited by, and makes me have a lot of excitement for what Flanagan does next. Because Gerald's Game was good. Gerald's Game was, if you haven't watched that, you should go back and watch that because that was good. I mean, the source material kind of determined what it was, but it was a very good adaptation. This was excellent. So I'm really excited to see what he does with Dr. Sleep, which I need to read that book. But
I just, it does give me a lot of excitement for his future, and just everybody involved in it. Like, I just think this is one of those things that just hit at the right time.
Because his, I believe Katie Siegel or Seagal, however you pronounce it, the actress who played Theo is his wife in real life.
Yeah, they're married.
And she was in Hush.
Yeah, they got married after Hush, I believe.
And then she was awesome with some of his other stuff and like other roles. But so.
Again, it's one of those weird things. It's like I don't know if I want a sequel or prequel or whatever.
I would be happy with it just being what it is, and he did something else.
Yeah, I just think that the way the world works now, though, is that I think this, and again, we don't know viewership numbers. Netflix does not reveal that stuff. But I don't know if they're going to just let that sit on a shelf and not try to capitalize on at least another season.
Because they have sequelized stuff that I didn't think they would, and then didn't sequelize things you think they might. Because
you could maybe go what Stranger Things was originally supposed to have been, which was like, each season was different. Whereas this one, they could do something like that.
I mean, every season would have to be different if they're not going to follow up.
Yeah, I'm saying, but like now they may not even do.
Would they even do? But would it be a different house? I mean, they could do the Haunting of Hill House. But I mean, I guess it's called the Hill House. So, but I mean, maybe they could do the Haunting of something else.
Something that me and Cordy could talk about is that you can do one or two different things. Really, the only two options they have is, I guess, is like one, a prequel.
Yeah.
Or two,
a different house.
Not even a different house. It could just be an alternate, like timeline, universe, whatever, because or it could just be like, somebody squats in the house.
Well, I mean, too, though, if you take it 20 years in the future or 40 years in the future, then you need to have like future tech and stuff.
Yeah, which I don't know if you do. But I'm just saying alternate timeline of like just a
different family, different scenario,
same house, but just different.
Well, it's kind of like American Horror Story will take a lot of same people and have just an alternate. I mean, but they've crossed stuff over. I don't want to compare it to that, but yeah, you can take the idea and just say, here's a completely different story.
Yeah. Not
connected to the past one whatsoever. So it can be new and fresh. But so I think that'll wrap up our discussion of The Haunting of Hill House, a series which we really enjoyed. If you're listening via iTunes, you can do us a huge favor and leave a review. That helps other people find the podcast. You can find all the work we're doing at housebyvideostore.com. You can find links there to all of our social media accounts, to Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, like all of our accounts. You can find links to there. Make sure to follow us on YouTube and Facebook for sure, because our short film Shared is on there. The short film we shot recently called They Knock will be coming out pretty soon. I know there's some post-production work to go on that one, but that's something that'll be coming out sooner than later. You can find all the stuff we've released before, find all of our old podcasts and everything. And like I said, make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook. And then if you want to follow us specifically on the internet, you can find me on Instagram at @TheWilliamCaps.
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at MetaWorldDerek.
And that'll wrap up this episode of the House by Base Horror Podcast. Thanks for listening.